This book doesn't really give you answers. It forces you to look differently at the things you already know, and whether that helps you or just completely turns you off depends a lot on who you are and where you are in life. Let's dive in. Can't Hurt Me is one of the most misunderstood self improvement audiobooks out there. People tend to think it's about suffering, but for me, it's really about standards. And that's why a lot of people either connect with it or completely bounce off of it. When people talk about Can't Hurt Me, it usually gets framed as this extreme, hardcore motivation book. But after listening to the audiobook, that framing didn't really sit right with me. One of the things that stood out the most about Can't Hurt Me is how much it centers on responsibility. And not responsibility in a motivational sense, and not in this fix your life kind of way. It's more like the book keeps quietly pointing the focus right back at you. And not on what happened or on what should have happened, but really on what you're willing to take ownership of right now. And that framing is where the book really divides people. For some people, that kind of framing feels empowering. And for others, it really just feels harsh. And this audiobook doesn't really try and soften that tension. It just lets it sit there. Another idea that comes up a lot is what he calls building a mental callus. And I didn't take this as an extreme embrace pain kind of message. It felt more like an idea that constantly avoiding discomfort keeps you fragile. And over time, doing these hard things will build this resilience. And it's not through intensity, but through consistency. And I think that's where people misread this book. They hear the extreme stories and miss the underlying idea, which is really just about showing up consistently, even when it's uncomfortable. This is also one of those books where I think the audiobook works better. Not because the writing is bad, but because of how the ideas will come out. You're not just listening to a narrator read the text. Goggins jumps in throughout and adds context and expands on what's being read. And this back and forth between the narration and his commentary will add the context that you just simply won't get if you just read the book. You hear why certain things are being said, and you hear when a point needs to be clarified a bit. Some of the ideas that will feel harsh when you're reading the text will actually get softened when you hear the explanation. Other times, they actually land harder because you hear the intent behind them. That made the audiobook feel less like a lecture and more like a continuous conversation. For me, that mattered because it helped me understand the intent behind the message instead of just reacting to the intensity. So, who does this audiobook work for? It works best for people who have an idea of what they should be doing, but consistency is their struggle. If you have a plan, you have goals, you're aware of what you need to do, but follow through is the problem, this book can really hit. It doesn't give you a new system, it just simply puts pressure on the standards that you already have. And for some people, that is really exactly what they need. That said, this book really is not meant for everybody. If you're looking for something that perhaps is a little bit more gentle, encouraging, even more reassuring, this probably isn't the right listen. And if you want the tactics, that is, if you want step one, step two, followed by step three, then this book can be frustrating. It's more of a mindset listen than a method listen. So if you're in a season where you need clarity, a plan, or structure, there are better books for that. But if you're in a season where you need a little bit of a push, where you need to stop negotiating with yourself, then this audiobook makes sense. For me, the biggest takeaway wasn't pushing harder. It was the standards and the idea that your standards quietly shape what you tolerate of yourself. Now, you don't notice that in the big moments. You really notice it in the small decisions. in the things that you let slide or in these habits that you're constantly making excuses for. That stuck with me really more than any single story found in this book. So, is Can't Hurt Me worth listening to? I think it depends on where you are and who you are in life. I don't think it works for everybody, and really, I don't think that it needs to. If you want something that challenges how you think about responsibility and standards, this audiobook can be impactful. But if you want something that meets you where you are without pushing back, then this probably isn't it. And honestly, that lines up pretty good with who Goggins is if you've ever heard him on any podcast or interviews. For me, it was worth it. Not because it gave me any new answers, but because it made me think differently about the things that I already knew. If you want to check out the audiobook for yourself, I'll leave the link in the description. In the next review, we're going to shift in a very different direction. I'm going to be reviewing The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. It's less about pressure and more about behavior, timing, and long-term thinking. If Can't Hurt Me is about raising your standards through discomfort, The Psychology of Money is more about how small decisions will compound over time. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.